Prince William had entered the gallery expecting nothing more than a private preview of a newly commissioned royal portrait. Then his steps stopped. His expression changed. Resting against Queen Camilla's painted wrist was a bracelet he knew instantly, not because it belonged to the crown, but because he had once seen it clasped around Princess Diana's arm. In that frozen second, a formal unveiling became something painfully personal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William moved closer without speaking, and the silence tightened. Buckingham Palace's long gallery had been chosen for privacy and the dignity expected of a royal unveiling. An official portrait is a commissioned image meant to represent a royal figure's place in the monarchy. Yet this one now carried something more dangerous than symbolism. Charles watched his son's face change. Camilla remained still. Catherine glanced toward Princess Anne, while the artist and household officials waited for an explanation. The prince kept his eyes fixed on the painted wrist. The sapphire and silver bracelet had never been approved as part of Camilla's clothing, nor had it appeared in the wardrobe notes. William knew every curve of it. He remembered the blue stones, the repaired link, and the way Diana touched the clasp when she was nervous. That memory struck hard, because the bracelet belonged to his mother's private life, not palace display. Charles stepped nearer and asked whether something was wrong. William did not answer at first. He lifted one hand toward the canvas but stopped before touching it. Then he turned toward Camilla and said, "That was my mother's." The king's expression hardened. The queen consort's posture stiffened. The artist lowered his gaze, suddenly aware that the detail carried a history no briefing had explained. Anne broke the silence by asking where the original bracelet was supposed to be. Catherine knew the answer. Diana's personal effects had been placed under a restricted family inventory, a controlled record limiting who could access or authorize each item. The bracelet was believed to remain sealed there. That belief now felt like a lie. The artist finally broke his silence through a documented account of the commission, insisting he had painted exactly what appeared in the official reference photographs supplied by the palace. Someone had placed the bracelet into those instructions. Someone expected it to survive unnoticed. William refused to leave until the authorization was identified. The unveiling ended. The investigation began. But the bracelet was not merely a forgotten jewel from Diana's past. It was tied to memories William had spent decades protecting from the very people now standing beside him. To everyone else in the room, the bracelet was a beautiful detail painted in silver and blue. To William, it carried the weight of childhood, grief, and a mother whose belongings had become sacred fragments of a life cut short. For Camilla, its appearance created a different terror. The possibility that she had been placed inside Diana's memory without understanding who had arranged it, or why. William could still remember the first time those stones caught his attention. Diana had worn the bracelet during a private summer gathering at Kensington Palace, the London home where she raised her sons after her marriage began to collapse. He had been young enough to ask why the stones looked different in the sunlight. She laughed, turned her wrist, and told him that some things changed depending on how closely a person looked. That memory had seemed harmless then. Now it felt like a warning. The prince carried more than recognition into that gallery. He carried ownership of a memory no institution could claim. Charles carried something darker, the return of wounds he had spent years trying to contain beneath duty, ceremony, and silence. Camilla faced another danger entirely. She feared the portrait would make it appear that she had taken possession of something belonging to Diana, not only a bracelet, but a place in history that could never truly be transferred. William remembered another evening with painful clarity. Diana had fastened the same bracelet before leaving for a charity dinner, then noticed the worry on his face. She knelt beside him and promised she would return before he went to sleep. The promise mattered, because he believed her completely. The bracelet became tied to that feeling of waiting, trust, and the fragile certainty that his mother would come back. Camilla sat rigidly after the unveiling and insisted she had never worn the piece. She said she had not known it appeared in the reference photographs, the official images supplied to guide the artist's work. Her denial sounded immediate, but it did not calm the room. It only widened the mystery. Catherine recognized the bracelet too. William had once shown her an archived family photograph, and explained why it was never to be used for ceremonial display. That private warning now echoed through the crisis. Anne noticed something else. Charles would not look directly at the portrait, and his silence suggested he knew more about the bracelet's location than he wished to admit. After the gallery emptied, Catherine found William standing alone beneath the painting. He told her, in a controlled voice, that he remembered touching the bracelet as a child and would never mistake it. Elsewhere, Anne quietly instructed the household archivist to retrieve the last signed inventory of Diana's personal jewelry. The emotional recognition was undeniable, but the palace still needed proof, and the records were about to reveal that this was no accidental resemblance. The palace inventory should have ended the mystery. Instead, it deepened it. Diana's bracelet had been logged, photographed, sealed, and placed inside a restricted archival case years earlier. Yet one handwritten entry showed that the case had been opened 6 months before Camilla's portrait sitting. The authorization carried no clear purpose, only a date, and the initials of someone close enough to the king to avoid ordinary questions. Anne placed the inventory before William and let the silence do its work. Diana's private jewelry had always been stored apart from crown property, the official collection belonging to the monarchy rather than any one person. Removing an item required 2 signatures, a written reason, and confirmation that it had been returned. Those safeguards existed because personal memory could not be treated like ceremonial equipment. Yet the bracelet's record showed a break in that chain. William read the entry once, then again. The case had been opened during preparations for a private royal heritage exhibition, an event designed to display symbolic family objects to a select audience. That exhibition was cancelled before it began, but the bracelet had still been removed. His anger did not erupt, it narrowed. Someone had handled his mother's possession, carried it through palace rooms, and returned it to storage without telling him. Charles received the same record in his study. He removed his glasses, recognized the date, and set the file down without speaking. The king remembered what had happened 6 months earlier at Clarence House, but memory alone did not prove whether he had approved it. The trigger had been a private portrait planning meeting. Camilla's senior dresser brought forward a tray of historic jewelry for what she called visual inspiration, meaning objects intended to help shape the portrait's symbolic message. Diana's bracelet was placed beside Camilla's sleeve, while official reference photographs were taken. The queen consort rejected several pieces, saying they felt too formal, but she never saw the bracelet clearly. A velvet cuff partly covered it before the photographer captured the final image. Anne slid the inventory closer and tapped the date with one finger. William closed the folder and demanded that every person from that meeting be questioned separately. Then he saw the second authorization. It belonged to Charles's longtime private secretary, the official trusted to communicate the monarch's wishes. That signature created the most dangerous question yet. Had the secretary acted on the king's direct command, or had Charles been kept outside a decision made in his name? The records had established how Diana's bracelet reached the portrait studio, but only one confrontation could reveal whether Camilla had been used, or whether she had chosen silence after discovering the truth. There were no cameras, no courtiers, and no ceremonial language when William entered the smaller portrait room where Camilla was waiting. The disputed canvas stood behind her beneath a protective covering. He did not accuse her of stealing the bracelet. His question was more direct, and somehow more devastating. When had she first realized that Diana's jewelry had been placed on her wrist? William had demanded the meeting before any palace committee could soften the crisis into an administrative mistake. A palace committee is a small group of senior officials formed to review royal decisions and control the official response. He knew what such language could do. It could turn grief into procedure, blame into confusion, and a deliberate choice into a harmless oversight. Charles wanted to attend. The king argued that his presence might keep the exchange calm, but his son refused. William would not allow the monarch to stand between him and Camilla, translating pain into compromise before the truth had even been spoken. This conversation had to belong to the two people whose histories had been forced together on that canvas. The prince asked whether she had noticed the bracelet during the sitting. Camilla admitted that she had seen a blue stone piece near her sleeve, but believed it came from the royal collection. The royal collection is the body of art, jewelry, and historic objects held for the sovereign and the nation. She insisted she had never been told it belonged to Diana. William opened an old photograph album and placed one image beside the portrait study. The clasp matched. So did the arrangement of stones and the thin silver chain. Camilla stared at the photograph, and her certainty began to collapse completely. Then she revealed what she had withheld. After the sitting, her senior dresser had privately described the jewelry as carrying historic significance, but had avoided naming Diana. Camilla had sensed something was wrong. Still, she asked no further questions, because Charles valued the portrait, and she feared disrupting a project meant to strengthen her position. That silence changed everything. William understood that she had not planned the act, but she had ignored the warning. Camilla reached toward the covered portrait, then pulled her hand back. He closed the album and told her that reconciliation could not be created by placing one woman's memory on another woman's body. At last, Camilla named the official who insisted the bracelet remain: the king's private secretary. He had claimed Charles wanted the past and present reconciled in one image. Camilla's admission shifted the blame away from a simple wardrobe decision and toward the person who had claimed to speak with the king's authority. Royal households survive through delegated power. Instructions pass through secretaries, dressers, archivists, and advisors until personal wishes become official actions. But when William examined the approval chain behind the portrait, he discovered something more dangerous than a missing signature. The secretary who authorized Diana's bracelet had invoked Charles's name repeatedly, yet no written order from the king existed anywhere in the file. William understood what that absence meant. The king's private secretary controlled communication between the portrait committee, the royal archives, Clarence House staff, and the artist. A private secretary is the senior official who turns a monarch's wishes into instructions for the royal household. If that person spoke with confidence, few people questioned whether the command had truly come from Charles. The portrait had been designed to symbolize continuity. It was meant to show Camilla fully absorbed into the monarchy's history, not standing beside the past, but appearing to carry it forward. That ambition made the choice of Diana's bracelet even more explosive. The object had not been added for beauty. It had been chosen to send a message. Charles sat with Anne in his private library and finally admitted that he had once spoken about acknowledging Diana's lasting place in William's life. He had wanted the family's history treated with honesty, but he had never approved the use of her jewelry. The king's voice hardened as he repeated that distinction. Anne did not comfort him. She challenged her brother for allowing courtiers to turn an unresolved family wound into a symbolic statement without consulting William. Her anger was controlled, but merciless. Charles had wanted unity. His officials had manufactured an image that risked humiliating his son. The secretary was summoned and confronted with the approval file. He confessed through a recorded internal interview that he had interpreted Charles's phrase, "Bring the family story together," as permission to include an object connected to Diana. Then a reference memo exposed the calculation behind the choice. The bracelet had been selected because most viewers would not recognize it, allowing the symbolism to remain hidden unless someone close to Diana noticed. Charles asked whether he had ever used the words Diana's bracelet. The secretary answered no. The king slowly removed the portrait approval folder from his desk and declared the authorization invalid. William then learned the portrait was scheduled for a major public reception within 48 hours. The family now faced three choices: remove it, alter it, or explain it before the world asked first. Every option carried consequences none could fully control. The internal decision was clear, but stopping the portrait's public display would expose the existence of a crisis the palace had only hours to contain. Before dawn, palace staff entered the gallery and removed the portrait from the wall. The gilded frame was wrapped, the display lights were switched off, and the reception program was quietly rewritten. Yet secrecy could not erase what had happened. Too many people had witnessed William's reaction, and the sudden disappearance of Camilla's portrait created a silence louder than any official announcement. Charles approved the suspension before sunrise. The portrait's public debut was cancelled, and the canvas was placed in secure storage until the bracelet could be removed from the composition. Secure storage meant a controlled palace room used for valuable works that could not remain on display. The decision protected the monarchy from immediate embarrassment, but it also confirmed that the crisis was real. The king's private secretary lost all portrait-related duties within hours. Palace officials then opened a wider review into who could authorize access to personal royal effects, meaning belongings tied to individual family members rather than the crown itself. William welcomed the review, but procedure offered him little comfort. The damage had already crossed from administration into betrayal. No announcement could conceal the personal cost now spreading inside. Camilla watched attendants carry the covered canvas away. Relief came first because Diana's bracelet would not be shown to the public. Humiliation followed almost immediately. Her official portrait, created to celebrate acceptance and continuity, had become evidence in a dispute about memory, consent, and silence. After the frame passed through the doorway, she sat beneath the empty wall and removed her own bracelet, as though its weight had suddenly become unbearable. Charles later visited William and tried to apologize. The monarch admitted that his household had acted carelessly in his name, but his son refused to let the conversation end there. The deepest wound, William told him, was not the painting. It was the belief that Diana's memory could be managed without the children who had lived inside that loss. The artist then produced an earlier sketch showing Camilla without the bracelet. That single image proved the jewelry had been added only after palace officials supplied the disputed reference photograph. Catherine soon uncovered something worse. The original bracelet had never been returned to its archival case. For several tense hours, the family feared it remained hidden somewhere inside Clarence's house. Camilla finally asked to meet William again. This time, she promised no defense and offered no explanation. She said only that she would place Diana's bracelet back into his hands herself. The portrait had been removed, but the family could not begin repairing the damage until Diana's real bracelet was found and returned by the person now most closely associated with its misuse. The second meeting took place without aides, secretaries, or the king. William arrived expecting another explanation. Instead, Camilla stood beside a small table with Diana's bracelet resting inside its original velvet case. For the first time since the unveiling, there was no portrait, no official statement, and no institution between them. Only the object that had forced decades of pain into the open. Camilla spoke first. She explained that the bracelet had been found inside a locked wardrobe cabinet where her senior dresser had stored jewelry used during the portrait reference session. A reference session is the private preparation used to create accurate images for an artist before the final work begins. The piece had remained boxed after the photographs were taken. She had never worn it publicly, never worn it privately, and had never asked why it was not returned. William listened without interruption, but silence did not mean forgiveness. The queen consort admitted that she should have questioned the bracelet the moment she learned it carried personal significance. Fear had stopped her. She had spent years avoiding anything that might reopen the wounds surrounding Diana, yet that avoidance had allowed others to make decisions inside the silence. The prince placed his fingers on the velvet case, but did not open it. Anger held him there, but grief held him more tightly. The object had survived, his mother had not. Opening the lid meant facing that difference again, and no royal duty could make it easier. Camilla then revealed one final detail. Charles had once told advisors that William remembered every object connected to Diana, every story, and every promise. Still, palace officials convinced themselves that the bracelet was obscure enough to escape recognition. Their confidence had not been based on ignorance. It had been based on underestimating a son's memory. Camilla pushed the velvet case across the table and said, "This should have come back to you before the portrait was ever painted." William opened it. A tiny repaired link caught his attention immediately. The same flaw Diana had once shown him after the bracelet snapped. He closed his eyes briefly, then said that returning it was the first honest thing anyone had done since the crisis began. The future king made his decision before leaving. The bracelet would not disappear into an anonymous archive shelf. It would be placed under direct family protection, where no official could remove it without consent, and only then would the palace address the public in his mother's name, without distortion. Their private exchange did not erase the injury, but it gave William the clarity to decide how Diana's memory, and the monarchy's mistake, would be presented to the world. By morning, the palace could no longer contain the story. Guests arriving for the scheduled reception noticed the empty space where Camilla's portrait had been advertised. Within hours, one photograph dominated television screens. William, leaving Buckingham Palace, carrying a narrow blue velvet case. The image offered no explanation, yet the expression on his face told the public that this was not a dispute about art. Buckingham Palace released a formal statement confirming that the portrait had been withdrawn because an unauthorized personal item connected to Diana had been included in the composition. A formal palace statement is the monarchy's official public account of an event, carefully written to limit confusion and define responsibility. This one did neither. It confirmed the error, but it also exposed the emotional wound beneath it. Charles accepted responsibility for weak oversight. Camilla approved the portrait's alteration. New rules placed Diana's personal effects under the direct consent of William and Harry, meaning neither palace officials nor advisors could use those belongings without permission from her sons. The decision mattered because it transformed memory into authority. For once, grief would not be managed around them. William reviewed the final wording with Catherine beside him. One phrase immediately angered him. Officials had called the bracelet a historical accessory, language that reduced a mother's possession to decoration. The prince struck it out and replaced it with a deeply personal possession. Catherine supported the change because both understood that words could either protect the truth or bury it. Camilla watched the coverage alone. She knew the public would no longer judge the portrait as a simple image of royal continuity. Every discussion would place her beside Diana, comparing intention with memory and position with loss. The queen consort had not worn the bracelet, but the symbolism had already attached itself to her. A newspaper captured the public mood with a photograph of the blank gallery wall beneath the headline, "The bracelet he could never forget." A national broadcaster froze William's expression from the unveiling and called it the instant private memory overruled royal symbolism. Outside Kensington Palace, crowds gathered at Diana's memorial gates. Blue ribbons appeared among handwritten notes. One young mother tied hers carefully as cameras recorded the message, "A mother's memory belongs to her children." That sentence spread faster than the palace statement itself. William then prepared his final decision. The corrected portrait might eventually return, but Diana's bracelet would be displayed first under her own name, with its history restored beyond dispute. The world had chosen what the bracelet represented, leaving William to deliver the final verdict on the portrait, the palace, and the limits of reconciliation. The crisis ended not with punishment, but with a boundary. William refused to allow Diana's memory to become a decorative bridge between uncomfortable chapters of royal history. Yet he also rejected the easy temptation to turn the bracelet into a weapon against Camilla. His final decision recognized the hurt, corrected the wrong, and made one principle unmistakable. Reconciliation cannot be built by rewriting the people who are no longer here to speak. William ordered Diana's bracelet removed from the General Palace Archive and placed inside a protected family collection overseen jointly by him and Harry. The archive, a controlled store of royal records and personal objects, could no longer release it without written consent from both brothers. That mattered, because the bracelet was not merely jewelry. It carried memories of childhood, loss, and the mother whose voice had vanished, long before palace officials tried to reshape her legacy. Charles listened as the prince made his position clear. William accepted that the king had not personally ordered the bracelet's inclusion, but he insisted that royal authority also meant taking responsibility for decisions made in the monarch's name. Charles did not argue. He understood that regret without accountability would only deepen the wound, and the king finally accepted the burden that came with the crown. Camilla answered in writing. In a formal acknowledgement, she stated that Diana's personal effects should never be used to strengthen or legitimize her own place within the monarchy. The queen consort did not deny the harm, and she did not hide behind aids. Her statement closed the deepest conflict by replacing avoidance with responsibility. The original portrait disappeared permanently. A revised version showed Camilla wearing jewelry from her own collection, ending any attempt to merge two women whose histories had to remain distinct. Then the bracelet returned to Kensington Palace for 1 week, beside a photograph of Diana wearing it. A simple inscription explained that her sons treasured it because it remained tied to their childhood. William paused before the case during the private opening. Catherine stood beside him, and their children gathered close. The future king placed his hand briefly against the glass above the bracelet. He did not look angry, he looked settled. She waited until he turned, and together they walked toward their children without looking back. There is no further mystery to solve. The portrait was removed. The bracelet was restored to Diana's name. Camilla accepted the boundary, Charles accepted responsibility, and William proved that protecting the past did not require remaining trapped inside it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.